The city bustled with its usual rhythm. Honking cars, the distant rumble of buses, and the occasional siren slicing through the spring air. Crowds moved like waves through the sidewalks of downtown Chicago, each person immersed in their own world, their own problems. But on the corner of Birch and 7th, something didn't quite belong. Passers-by hardly noticed at first. Just two boys, twins by the look of them, barely 8 years old, standing still in the sea of motion. They were huddled close together, gripping a small red toy car between them like it was the most precious thing in the world. "Please, sir, would you like to buy this car?" The smaller of the two asked, his voice fragile and hopeful. He stepped forward slightly as a man in a business coat walked by. The man barely glanced down before shaking his head and continuing on. The boy's face dropped, but he didn't step back. His brother, standing beside him, nudged him gently and whispered, "It's okay, we'll ask the next one." Their clothes were worn and slightly oversized, as though handed down a few times too many. The shoelaces on one of their sneakers were missing, and their hair looked like it hadn't been properly brushed in days. But it was their eyes, wide, determined, and pleading, that spoke of a story deeper than anyone cared to notice. For nearly an hour, they stood there, offering the car to anyone who looked their way. Some smiled sadly and walked on. Others didn't even see them. Then, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. Out stepped a tall man in a dark charcoal suit, shoes polished like mirrors, and a silver watch that gleamed under the morning sun. He adjusted his cufflinks as he prepared to cross the street toward the high-rise building across from the market. His name was Ethan Walker, a self-made millionaire and CEO of a leading logistics tech company. People in the city often whispered about how ruthless he could be in business. His face had graced the cover of Entrepreneur magazine last fall, and he was expected to speak at a conference later that week about innovation and efficiency. Ethan Walker didn't stop for distractions. He didn't have time for feelings. But as he stepped onto the sidewalk, something made him pause. Two voices, faint but insistent, drifted toward him. "Mister, would you like to buy our car?" He turned. The boys were staring directly at him. The little red toy car held out between them like an offering to a king. For a second, he didn't speak. No one had ever tried to sell him a toy car on the street before. His brow furrowed. "Why?" he asked, his tone more curious than kind. The taller twin, Lucas, swallowed. "Because we need to get money for our mom. She's sick." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What kind of sickness?" "We don't know," the smaller boy, Liam, murmured. "But she doesn't get out of bed anymore. She says she's tired all the time. She tries to smile for us, but her eyes look sad. We think she's hiding how bad it is." Lucas stepped forward. "We heard on the news that sometimes you can go to a better doctor if you have more money. So, we're trying to get more." Ethan stared at them, then at the toy car. It was chipped at the edges, the paint fading, one wheel slightly askew, probably a dollar store item at best. Yet here they were, offering their only toy to strangers on the street, hoping someone would care enough to help. Something in his chest tightened. Years ago, he had been the kid nobody helped. The kid people pretended not to see. The one who knew what hunger felt like deep in his bones. But unlike these two, Ethan hadn't had anyone to fight for except himself. These boys, they were fighting for someone else. A woman exiting the store accidentally bumped into him. He blinked, snapping out of the memory. The boys were still looking at him, not with expectation, but with the kind of innocence that hadn't yet been crushed by too many disappointments. "How much?" Ethan asked, his voice quieter now. The boys looked at each other, confused. "How much?" Lucas echoed. "For the car," Ethan clarified. "Oh, we were thinking maybe $5. Liam offered, unsure. Ethan pulled out his wallet. He had no small bills, just 200s and a black card. He stared at the boys, then at the card. The weight of their situation felt suddenly heavy in his hands. He slipped one of the hundreds free and knelt to their level. "I'll give you this," he said, holding out the bill, "but only if you also tell me where you live." Lucas and Liam looked at each other again. It was clear they'd been warned not to talk to strangers. But this man didn't look dangerous. He looked important, and he was the only one who had stopped. "We live on Ellsworth Street, the apartments next to the church," Lucas said slowly. "Apartment 2B. Ethan nodded. "All right. Keep the car. And buy something warm to eat." He handed them the $100 bill. Their eyes widened like saucers. "But this is too much," Liam whispered. "We just needed 5. Ethan smiled faintly, something he hadn't done in a while. "Maybe your mom needs a little more than 5. He stood up, adjusted his jacket, and turned to leave. But something tugged at him. Not guilt. Not sympathy. Something deeper. Something unexplainable. He pulled out his phone. "Call Davis," he said into the receiver as he walked toward his car. "Sir," came the voice of his personal assistant. "I'm going to be late to the real estate meeting. Something's come up." There was a pause. "Understood." He glanced back once more at the boys, who were now staring at the $100 bill like it was a golden ticket. Then they ran, not toward a toy store or candy shop, but straight toward a small corner diner, probably to get something cheap and filling before heading back to their mother. Ethan stood beside his car, hand resting on the door handle, his mind suddenly far away from board meetings and stock prices. A memory bubbled up from the depths. A single mother, pale and coughing, telling him stories by candlelight during a power outage, her voice weak but full of love. The sound of her laughter echoing in their small one-bedroom apartment. And the morning he had come home from school to find a neighbor waiting with tears in her eyes. He pushed the memory down. That was a different life, a different Ethan. But as he slid into the driver's seat and stared out the windshield, he realized that no matter how much money he had made, no matter how high he climbed, some things you never outrun. And today, maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running. He took a breath, pulled up a map on his dashboard display, and typed in Ellsworth Street, apartment 2B. Because something told him this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The door to apartment 2B creaked open, its hinges protesting like they hadn't been oiled in years. Ethan stood in the dimly lit hallway of the old brick building, questioning his own sanity. He had canceled a multimillion-dollar meeting, turned his car away from downtown, and followed the directions of 2 boys he had just met on the street. That wasn't the Ethan Walker he knew. But something about their eyes, the honesty in their desperation, it had scratched at a locked door inside him. One he hadn't opened in decades. He had parked his Mercedes a block away, not wanting to draw attention. The building was nestled beside an old church, its walls worn from decades of rain, time, and sorrow. Paint peeled from the banister as he walked up, and the hallway smelled faintly of boiled vegetables and damp carpet. Now, standing before the open door, Ethan wasn't sure what he expected. The twin boys stood inside, wide-eyed and breathless, as though they had sprinted up ahead to make sure their mother was ready for company. Though judging by the apartment, no one had been ready for visitors in a very long time. The living room was small, barely larger than Ethan's walk-in closet. A threadbare sofa slouched near the wall, cushions fraying at the edges. The wallpaper had once been yellow, maybe. Now it was a patchwork of dull beige and water stains. A small TV sat on a wobbly stand beside a crate of books. Most of them were children's picture books, with dog-eared covers and crayon scribbles inside. Liam stepped aside, motioning for him to come in. "She's in the bedroom," he whispered. "She was asleep, but we told her someone important came." Lucas followed, rubbing his hands nervously. "We told her you gave us $100, and she cried. Not 'cause she was sad, but like she didn't know how to say thank you." Ethan swallowed, unsure what to say. He had faced down billion-dollar mergers, survived hostile takeovers, and convinced Fortune 500 CEOs to sign on the dotted line. But here, in this tiny apartment with these two boys looking up at him like he was a miracle, he suddenly had no words. I just want to meet her," he managed. Lucas nodded and led the way. The bedroom door was half open. A faint smell of lavender and medicine wafted out. Inside, the room was dark except for the soft glow of sunlight slipping through a cracked window. A woman lay in bed, her skin pale, lips slightly chapped, hair thinning and tangled. She wore a sweatshirt that looked 2 sizes too big and had a patch sewn on the elbow. Her eyes, however, were clear and focused. They locked on Ethan as soon as he stepped in. "You're the man who gave my boys money?" she asked softly, voice hoarse. Ethan nodded. "Yes, Mom. My name's Ethan Walker. I met them outside the market." She tried to sit up, wincing in pain. Lucas rushed to her side, fluffing the pillow behind her. "They said they sold you their car." Ethan allowed himself a small smile. "They offered. I didn't buy it. I wanted to help." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. "I told them not to do anything crazy, but they're all I've got. And they want so badly to fix what they don't understand." "What's your name?" he asked. "Angela," she replied, reaching for a glass of water on the bedside table. "Angela Carter." Ethan nodded again, glancing around the room. There were no family photos, no flowers, no personal touches. Just an old alarm clock, a stack of unpaid medical bills in a tray by the bed, and a woman trying to hold herself together for the sake of her children. "Can I ask, what's wrong? I mean, are you seeing anyone? A doctor?" Angela let out a bitter laugh that dissolved into a coughing fit. Lucas placed a hand on her shoulder as she steadied herself. "I had a job at a diner, worked double shifts for months. Then the coughing started. Fatigue. I'd lose my balance just standing. Went to the ER once. They ran a few tests, said I might have lupus. Told me to follow up with a specialist. But specialists aren't cheap, and when you're behind on rent and have 2 mouths to feed, you skip appointments." Ethan finished softly. Angela nodded. "I tried to keep working, but I started fainting. My manager couldn't risk it, so he let me go." Ethan sat on the edge of the old desk chair across from her. "Have your boys, do they go to school?" "They do," she said quickly. "They've missed a few days lately, but I do my best. They're good kids. They love math and drawing. Liam draws superheroes all the time. Says he's going to invent a robot that can heal sick people." Ethan smiled faintly, picturing the small boy with the big heart. "He might just do that." Angela sighed. "I don't need a handout, Mr. Walker. I'm not proud of what they did today, but I'm grateful you were kind to them. Most people don't even see them." "I understand," Ethan said and added, "I've been where they are." Angela's eyes softened, surprised. "You?" He nodded. "Single mom. 2 jobs. We lost our apartment once. I used to wait outside restaurants and offer to wash windshields for quarters." Angela studied him, searching for the truth in his face. She found it. Ethan stood. "Look, I know you don't know me, and I know it's crazy, but I have the resources to help. At the very least, let me connect you with a specialist. I have a doctor on staff who can do an evaluation and get you a diagnosis. No charge." Angela looked like she wanted to protest, but exhaustion won out. "I don't want pity." "It's not pity," Ethan said, his voice low. "It's human decency." Silence hung in the room for a moment. Then she gave a tiny nod. "All right." From the doorway, Lucas let out a breath he'd been holding. That evening, Ethan made several calls. He arranged for a nurse to visit the next morning. He sent groceries to the apartment and paid the building superintendent 3 months of back rent. But something else happened, too, something no money could buy. When he returned later that night with a care package in hand, he found Liam sitting on the floor, drawing with an old colored pencil. He looked up and said, "Mr. Ethan, can I draw you a superhero? One that saves moms." Ethan felt a knot in his throat. He smiled. "I'd like that very much." Outside, the streetlights flickered on, and for the first time in a long time, the apartment on Ellsworth Street didn't feel quite so cold. The nurse arrived at 9 a.m. sharp the next morning, carrying a medical bag and a calm efficiency that made Angela feel slightly more human. She introduced herself as Clara and immediately got to work, her gentle demeanor putting everyone at ease. The twins sat silently on the sofa, watching with wide eyes as Clara checked their mother's vitals and asked questions no one had thought to ask in weeks, perhaps months. Ethan wasn't there yet, but Angela suspected he'd return. Part of her still couldn't believe the events of the past day. Her sons, trying to sell their only toy to save her. A stranger stopping. Not just stopping, but staying. Helping. She'd lived too long in a world where help came with conditions, or never came at all. But something about Ethan unsettled that belief. Clara wrote something in a notepad and smiled at Angela. "You're strong," she said simply, "but your body's screaming for rest and treatment. With your permission, I'd like to bring in our in-house doctor. He's the best in rheumatology and autoimmune disorders." Angela blinked. "That's expensive, right?" Clara smiled. "Mr. Walker is covering all medical costs. He asked for the best, so that's what you're getting." Angela's throat tightened. Her first instinct was to refuse. It was too much, too fast. But her body, aching and brittle, had no more fight left. And if this stranger's help could keep her out of a hospital bed permanently, keep her boys from becoming orphans, then maybe, just maybe, she could accept it. She nodded. "All right." Clara gave her a reassuring pat on the hand. "That's all we need." Ethan arrived later that afternoon, holding a paper bag filled with fresh fruit, coloring books, and a small toolkit set that he told the boys was for building real hero stuff. Liam and Lucas lit up the moment they saw him. It was strange, how quickly they had come to trust him. But in their world, trust wasn't given freely. It was earned in small gestures. And Ethan, unknowingly, had made all the right ones. Angela was propped up in bed, looking stronger than yesterday, or maybe just more hopeful. She smiled at Ethan as he entered, that weary edge in her voice softening. "Your nurse is amazing." "I only hire amazing," he replied with a grin. Angela chuckled, and the sound made him feel something unexpected. Pride. "You didn't have to bring us anything else," she added, nodding toward the bag in his hands. "I didn't. I wanted to," Ethan replied. "Besides, your boys are aspiring engineers. They need tools." The twins beamed as they rummaged through the bag. Angela shook her head with mock disapproval, but Ethan could see her eyes misting over again. As the kids settled on the floor to play, Ethan sat in the worn chair beside the bed, careful not to disturb the moment. He had planned to stay only a few minutes, but something kept pulling him back here. Maybe it was their courage. Maybe it was the mirror they held up to his own childhood. "I hope I'm not crossing a line," Ethan said quietly. "But I wanted to ask, do you have any other family? Anyone who can help?" Angela hesitated. Her fingers curled around the edge of the blanket. "My parents passed a few years back. My sister lives across the country, but we haven't spoken in years. My ex, the boy's father, he's been gone since I was pregnant. Left when he found out there were 2 heartbeats instead of 1. Ethan frowned, jaw tightening. "I'm sorry." Angela shrugged like it didn't matter, but the pain flickered behind her eyes. "It is what it is. I stopped waiting for him a long time ago." "Still," Ethan said, "no one should have to fight this alone." She looked at him then, really looked at him. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't flinch. "Because I remember what it feels like to have nothing. I remember watching my mom work herself to the bone, too proud to ask for help. And I remember thinking, If I ever had the means to help someone like her, like us, I'd do it. Angela was quiet for a long moment. I think you saved my boys the moment you stopped on that sidewalk, she whispered. They needed to believe someone still cared. Ethan felt that familiar knot in his throat again. And maybe I needed to believe it too. For the next hour, they talked, not about sickness or money, but about small things, the kind of things people talk about when they're beginning to feel safe again. Angela told him how Liam loved drawing superheroes because he believed anyone could be one. How Lucas once stayed up an entire night trying to fix an old toaster with a spoon and duct tape. Ethan told her about his mother, a waitress who used to sew his school clothes by hand. About how he built his first computer using second-hand parts in his garage. They were stories meant to fill space, but they wove something larger, a bridge between their worlds. When the twins dozed off on the couch, exhausted from excitement, Angela reached beside her bed and pulled out a worn photo. She handed it to Ethan. It was a picture of her and the boys, taken when they were about 5. They were all grinning at the camera, covered in flour, and holding a half-decorated cake. We baked it together for my birthday, she said softly. It didn't rise properly, but it was perfect. Ethan studied the photo. It was blurry, poorly lit, but beautiful. I want to help more than just with the doctor, he said carefully. I want to make sure you and the boys have a place that's safe, that you don't have to worry about rent or food, or walking 10 blocks for medicine. Angela's expression faltered. That's a lot. I know, he replied, but this isn't charity. It's an investment. In what? In 3 people who deserve better than what life handed them. Angela didn't speak, but her hand trembled slightly as she reached to wipe away a tear. I'm not promising to fix everything, Ethan added, but I am promising that you won't go through this alone anymore. The silence that followed was heavier than words, but for the first time in years, Angela felt like the weight wasn't all on her shoulders anymore. Ethan stood, gently covered the sleeping boys with a blanket, and glanced back once more before leaving. Outside, the wind had picked up, rustling the leaves in the alley. But in apartment 2B, something fragile had been restored. Hope. Ethan found himself waking up early the next morning, the memory of Angela's tired but grateful smile etched deeply into his mind. He wasn't sure when the line between doing a good deed and being emotionally invested had blurred, but it had. Something about that little family clung to him like gravity, refusing to let go. He hadn't planned on seeing them again so soon, but by 8 a.m., he was already in his car, a fresh bag of groceries on the passenger seat, and a strange nervous flutter in his chest. As he pulled into the neighborhood, he saw the twins sitting on the front steps of the apartment building, their legs dangling, faces turned toward the sun. They looked up when his car approached and waved with excitement that no money could ever buy. That genuine joy, simple and pure, moved Ethan more than any business success ever had. "Morning, Mr. Ethan," Liam shouted, running toward the car with Lucas close behind. Ethan laughed as he got out. "Morning, you two. You boys always up this early." Lucas grinned, showing a gap where a tooth had fallen out. "Mom says early birds find hope faster." "That sounds like something a very wise mom would say," Ethan replied, ruffling his hair. He followed them upstairs where Angela was already awake, sitting at the small kitchen table with a notebook in front of her. Her hair was tied back, and the color in her face was a little stronger than the day before. The room smelled like coffee, and for a second, everything felt normal, comfortable. "I brought groceries," Ethan said, placing the bag on the table. "You've done more than enough," Angela said, but her voice lacked resistance. "Just thought you might want real eggs instead of instant oatmeal for a change," he teased. She chuckled. "Real eggs are magic." While Angela unpacked the bag, Ethan sat at the table, eyeing the notebook curiously. "What's that?" he asked. Angela hesitated, then turned it toward him. The pages were filled with hand-drawn plans and ideas. "I used to be in nursing school," she said, "had to drop out when the boys were 2. Been trying to finish this little dream of mine in bits and pieces. Plans for a mobile health clinic. You know, something that could go into neighborhoods like this. Places no one wants to serve. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That's incredible. She looked surprised. You think so? I know so, he replied. Do you have any idea how rare it is to find someone who dreams of helping others, even when they're struggling themselves? Angela looked down, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I don't know if it's rare. I think we just don't get noticed. He didn't say anything for a moment, but he was thinking. Hard. This wasn't just a woman trying to survive. This was someone who had the heart and mind to change things, if only someone gave her the chance. You still want to do this? He asked gently. She nodded without hesitation. Every day. Then I want to help. Angela's head snapped up. Ethan, I'm not trying to take over your dream, but I can help build it. With you in charge, your vision, your rules. I just want to be the guy who removes the roadblocks. She was stunned into silence. Let's start with getting you back in school, he continued. I'll cover tuition, supplies, whatever you need. And once you're ready, we'll start the clinic. Together. Tears brimmed in her eyes, but this time, she didn't hide them. You don't know what this means, she whispered. I think I do, Ethan said softly. Liam and Lucas, who had been quietly coloring in a corner, suddenly jumped up. Are we gonna have a van with lights? Like a superhero ambulance? Liam asked excitedly. Angela and Ethan both laughed, and Ethan nodded. Absolutely. Lights, gadgets, maybe even a name like Hope on Wheels. Lucas clapped his hands. Best name ever. The rest of the day passed in a warm blur. They cooked lunch together, pancakes and scrambled eggs, and the boys proudly cracked the eggs, badly, causing more shells to end up in the bowl than the pan. Angela laughed so hard she had to sit down, and Ethan couldn't stop smiling. The apartment, once filled with quiet struggle, now rang with life. Later in the afternoon, Angela showed Ethan the building's rooftop, a space she often went to at night when the boys were asleep, just to breathe. From there, they could see the city skyline in the distance, glimmering with promise. I used to dream about being up there, she said, nodding toward the towering buildings. Now, I just want to build something good down here. That's where the real change starts, Ethan replied. She looked at him, her eyes soft. What about you? What's your dream now? Ethan thought for a long moment. It used to be success, money, recognition, but lately, I think it's this, being part of something real, something that matters. The wind picked up, brushing hair across Angela's face. Ethan reached out instinctively, gently tucking it behind her ear. Their eyes met, and for the first time, something unsaid lingered between them, something fragile, but undeniable. Just then, the boys burst through the rooftop door, dragging 2 blankets and a plastic telescope. We're watching stars tonight, Lucas declared, even if it's still daytime. Angela shook her head, laughing. You two are hopeless. No, Ethan corrected, smiling. They're full of hope. They stayed up there for hours, talking, laughing, dreaming. And while no stars appeared in the sky just yet, something even brighter had started to shine within that little family, and within Ethan. He had walked into their lives as a stranger, but he was becoming something more. The next few weeks unfolded like a quiet miracle. Every morning, Ethan found himself drawn back to that modest apartment, not out of obligation, but because something deep inside him had shifted. It wasn't just about charity anymore. It was about connection, growth, redemption. Angela and her boys had become a part of his life in a way he hadn't anticipated, and every moment he spent with them added something to his soul that no boardroom could provide. Angela had officially re-enrolled in her nursing program, thanks to Ethan's support. He'd taken care of the paperwork, and even managed to pull a few strings with the university board to allow her to continue where she left off. When the acceptance email came through, Angela had cried in the middle of the living room, holding the twins in her arms, while Ethan stood quietly near the door, watching her reclaim a dream she'd been forced to let go of. The boys were thriving too. Liam had taken a sudden interest in space and insisted on turning the corner of their living room into a NASA station. Lucas wanted to be a doctor, just like his mom, and practiced with a plastic stethoscope on anyone who sat still long enough. Their joy was contagious, and Ethan began to crave the energy of their small, hope-filled world. But not everything was perfect. One Thursday afternoon, Angela received a letter slipped under her door. Her landlord, Mr. Kerwin, a man infamous in the building for his greed and lack of empathy, was increasing the rent by nearly 40%. The letter didn't even come with a conversation, just a demand and a cold warning. Pay the new rate or vacate by the end of the month. Angela stood frozen in the kitchen, the letter trembling in her hands. The boys were napping in the bedroom, and Ethan was working from her small dining table when he noticed the color drain from her face. He took the paper from her gently. "Read it." His jaw clenched. "Are you serious?" he muttered. Angela shook her head slowly. "I can't afford that. Not now. Not with school starting again. Not even with the part-time job I'm picking up on weekends." Ethan looked at her, his mind already working through possible solutions. "I can help," he started, but she stopped him with a raised hand. "No," she said softly. "Not like that. I'm so grateful for what you've already done, but I need to fight some battles on my own. I need to show the boys that their mom doesn't give up, that she finds solutions." Ethan respected that, but he couldn't ignore it either. That night, he made a few calls. One was to his legal team, the second was to a friend in real estate, and the third was to himself in the mirror, asking why it mattered so much, why she mattered so much. The next morning, Angela received a knock on the door. It wasn't Ethan. It was Mr. Kerwin, grinning smugly in his crumpled beige suit. "Miss Carter," he said without even waiting to be invited in, "I'm just here to remind you that the new rate starts next week." Angela stood her ground. "You can't just increase rent without a valid reason or proper notice." "I can do whatever I like with my property," he snapped. "People like you don't have the resources to fight it, so I suggest you pack early." Ethan appeared behind him without warning, hands in his coat pockets, his presence like a shadow of thunder. "Actually," Ethan said coolly, "I bought the building this morning." Kerwin spun around, eyes wide. "What?" "I've been eyeing this block for a while," Ethan continued, voice calm but firm. "Decided it was time to make a move. As of 9 a.m., the building and your role is under new management, and I've already submitted the paperwork to terminate your contract as property manager." Angela's jaw dropped. Mr. Kerwin spluttered, his face turning red as he realized his power was slipping through his fingers. You can't just." "I can," Ethan interrupted, holding up the signed transfer documents. And I did. Within 10 minutes, Kerwin had stormed out, shouting threats that echoed uselessly down the hallway. Angela stood by the doorway, stunned. "You bought the building." "I wasn't trying to play hero," Ethan said quietly, "but no one gets to threaten your boys. Or you. Not on my watch." Angela's eyes filled with tears again, but this time she didn't look away. She walked up to him and took his hand. No words, just a silent, powerful moment of gratitude. Later that evening, they sat on the rooftop again, watching the lights flicker across the city skyline. The boys were chasing each other in circles, laughing so hard they could barely breathe. "You didn't have to do any of this," Angela whispered, watching the twins. "I know," Ethan replied, "but I wanted to. And not because I feel sorry for you." "Then why?" He looked at her, the city lights dancing in his eyes. "Because I see you. The way you fight, the way you love those boys, The way you keep going even when everything is against you. You remind me of everything I forgot chasing success. And I think I needed you more than you ever needed me." Angela blinked, speechless. No one had ever said something like that to her. "You deserve more than survival," Ethan added. "You deserve a life filled with joy. And I want to be part of that, if you'll let me." Her eyes shimmered, and for the first time in a long while, her heart opened without fear. "Then stay," she whispered, "because we're just getting started." Ethan smiled, and somewhere deep in the city, under a sky not yet filled with stars, a new story had just begun, one of second chances, fierce love, and the kind of hope that could light up even the darkest corners. The weeks that followed unfolded like the pages of a book Ethan never knew he wanted to read. Each chapter brought something new, small victories, quiet mornings filled with laughter, and even the occasional storm that reminded them all how fragile yet beautiful life could be. Angela began her nursing classes with more passion than anyone in her cohort. After her first day back, she came home radiant. Her cheeks flushed with excitement as she told Ethan and the boys every detail. "I thought I'd forgotten everything," she laughed. "But the moment I stepped into that classroom, it felt like breathing again." Ethan was there for all of it. Not just physically, but emotionally, present in a way he hadn't been for anyone in years. He built a legacy with his company, grown wealthy beyond imagination. But none of it compared to sitting at the kitchen table helping Liam and Lucas with their reading, or cheering Angela on when she aced her midterms. One evening, they sat together at the very spot where it all began, outside the small corner store where the twins had first tried to sell their toy car. Angela smiled as she watched her boys chase each other down the sidewalk, laughing so loudly it made strangers stop and smile. "It's strange," she said softly, "how everything can change in the blink of an eye. One moment we were just trying to survive. The next, you were there." Ethan glanced at her, then down at his hands. "Do you ever think," he asked slowly, "that maybe fate doesn't make mistakes?" Angela nodded. "I think sometimes the hardest paths are the ones that lead us exactly where we're supposed to be." And yet, the path ahead was not without shadows. Late one night, Ethan received a call from his board of directors. His unexpected time away from the company, though covered by his second-in-command, had raised concerns. Investors were restless. Rumors had started to spread that he was stepping down, losing his edge, maybe even getting ready to sell the company. He stared at the phone long after the call ended. The empire he built was tugging at him again. It needed him, demanded him. The next day, he called a meeting with his executive team. They gathered in the glass-walled office overlooking the skyline, waiting for the man they remembered as laser-focused, untouchable, intimidating. But this Ethan was different. "I've made a decision," he said, voice steady. "I'm stepping back. Not retiring, not disappearing, but I'm no longer letting this company define me. I've spent decades chasing numbers and neglecting life. That ends now." There was stunned silence. "But, sir," one of the senior partners began, "we have mergers pending, a potential IPO expansion. And," Ethan raised a hand, "I trust the people I've trained. I believe in what we've built. But I'm done measuring my worth by quarterly reports. I want to build something that matters to people, not just shareholders." The next day, the news exploded across every business channel. Tech tycoon Ethan Carter steps back to focus on family and purpose. Speculation ran wild, but Ethan didn't care. For the first time, he felt free. Back at Angela's apartment, things were shifting too. With Ethan's help, not just financial, but emotional and strategic, Angela had co-founded a nonprofit dedicated to supporting single parents going through hardship. They called it Small Hands, Big Hearts, inspired by the way Liam and Lucas had held out that tiny toy car with trembling hands, believing they could change their world. The organization started with food donations and emergency housing. Soon, local volunteers joined, then doctors, lawyers, social workers. People began sharing their own stories, and Angela became a beacon of hope, proof that survival could bloom into success, that tragedy didn't have to be the end. The twins, now in school, began their own journey of healing. They still clutched each other tightly at night sometimes, especially during storms, but they also smiled more, played more, and started asking about dreams again. One Sunday, as they walked through the park hand in hand, Lucas tugged on Ethan's coat. "Are you gonna marry Mommy?" Ethan blinked, caught off guard. Angela nearly choked on her coffee. Liam, never one to miss a moment, added, "Yeah, so we can all have the same last name." Ethan crouched down to their level, grinning. "Well, that's a pretty important question, guys. Maybe you should ask your mom if she wants to marry me first." Angela's cheeks flushed, but she smiled. "Maybe I'm waiting for you to ask properly," she teased. He looked at her, really looked, into her eyes, into her soul, and realized there was no more waiting needed. That evening, under a sky scattered with stars, in the same park where they'd started to dream again, Ethan dropped to one knee. No fancy fanfare, just him, her, and the two boys bouncing excitedly in place. "I've had everything money could buy," he said, "but I never knew what it meant to truly live. Until I met you. Angela, you and the boys saved me. Will you marry me?" Tears shimmered in her eyes as she whispered, "Yes." The boys cheered so loudly, people clapped from nearby benches, even though they didn't know the story. But that was the beauty of it. They didn't need to know, because some love stories didn't need to be flashy. Some just needed to be real. In the months that followed, the wedding was simple, filled with wild flowers, homemade vows, and a dance floor that never emptied. Their lives were no longer about survival or success, but about meaning, connection, and second chances. Ethan, Angela, Liam, and Lucas were now a family in every sense of the word. And the toy car, the tiny symbol that had started it all. It sat on the mantel above their fireplace, encased in glass, a reminder that sometimes the smallest hands can change the biggest hearts, and that even in the darkest moments, love has a way of finding its way home.